Hi, James. Let's take a look at your landscape critique. Okay, looking at some of these thumbnails here. Okay, looks good. Nice day out in Forest Park. Beautiful. Okay, let's start in here. I'll click on this first one here. Hopefully it'll get in there. There we go. Okay. Okay, let's check the photo details here. All right. Okay, so as I'm looking at this, it looks a little on the bright side. So I'm wondering if you had adjusted your exposure compensation here. It says exposure. Let's see. So your ISO is at 1,000. Okay, so on a bright day like this, check your ISO. Your ISO could be at 100. So maybe that's what you were hoping to set it at, and you ended up setting it at 1,000 here. So it's at it's a little bright. And I see that there's a number of shots that all are pretty much the same exposure. Okay, so maybe you were working with the exposure compensation, because now these other shots look a lot more normal. So hard to say. It doesn't really say. There's this little thing here that says exposure bias, and there's nothing in there. Sometimes the cameras don't provide that same kind of information. So I can see that it's overexposed, and perhaps you did the overexposure compensation for that. So anyway, so let's take a look at these other images here. So these are nicely exposed. And here the ISO speed's at 1,000. So when you're outside, make sure that you're not shooting at 1,000. That's a lot faster than necessary in most cases. You also have an aperture of f/22, which is great, in terms of being able to get a long depth of field, and your ISO is at 400th of a second, so that's pretty fast. And so you could bump that your ISO down. So same thing here. This is f/22, great, fantastic for that. But just bring that ISO down, and but you can see when you've got the depth of field, the aperture at 22, you've got everything in focus, which is sometimes, especially when you're doing landscapes, very helpful to be able to have all those details in focus. Same thing here, aperture f/22. These are all pretty consistent exposures. Good. And perfect right here when you're using more of a wide angle shot to see that you've got everything in focus from in the foreground all the way out to infinity out there. So in some landscapes that works just fantastic. Okay. So in this case, shooting back into the sun, I don't know if you had your camera set on manual, because to me it would seem like this might get a little bit darker or something. But anyway, in terms of the composition and everything, nice composition. This draws your eye right up to the art museum up there. And you've got all these nice triangular composition elements going on here too. So you've got kind of a triangle right here, and then a triangle wedge of the lake, and then everything kind of pointing right at the art museum there. So that looks good compositionally. Just look at those that ISO. Drop that ISO down. Okay, this is better. Like the fact that you've got this little duck right in there too, like the pond. But probably you may want to take a look. Maybe if you have access to Photoshop or something, this little bright area right there kind of draws your eye. What you're really intending to look at is right in here, but this kind of draws your eye away. So if you either darken this down a little bit with Photoshop, if you have something like that, or maybe crop it a little bit so that it doesn't take your eye off the page. This is nice. I like this. Always love going out there, shoot that reflecting pool out there. And the same kind of thing here. Your exposures are staying very consistent. At ISO 1000, f/22, and a 400th of a second. That 400th really stops the water, so that could be really effective. And you could actually get in a little closer, but in terms of composition, this works out kind of nice. This is nicely balanced, so I like that. Okay, good. Whenever you have a subject like this, you might want to consider, I know it's not right perfectly in the center, but in terms of you might want to do a little cropping, and maybe crop it so that it's like in the lower left or the lower right. You know, usually something like this, you crop it and you give it a little bit of room to give it a sense of that it's moving in a certain direction here. And then once again, all your exposures are the same there. Same thing here. Always hard when you're shooting back into the sun. You get you know, kind of has this little softness of the details here in the art museum. But I guess I would experiment with instead of shooting at eye level, because sometimes when you shoot at eye level like this, you get you know, just a pretty consistent look to things. But I would experiment, you know, maybe shooting down a little bit lower, maybe get down closer to the water level, or come in and maybe like shoot through these balustrades and maybe shoot back up at the art museum up there to give it something so that you're framing things up a little differently. So look for different elements, you know, whenever you're taking. So besides taking like the standard shots like this, try and find different elements to frame your picture, you know, because it could add to the interest in the photo. Okay, out there on the golf course. Now, when you're taking a look at something like this, the landscape-wise, you know, certainly got great depth of field. But unless you're really emphasizing the shadows on the trees, you could just either in the camera, you know, when you're shooting it, crop it so that there's a little less foreground and more of the trees and the golfer back there. So, you know, in terms of actually looking at this picture, I think I probably would have just chopped off, you know, a good portion of this lower part of the picture here. Let's see what you got here. So we got a few shots, same kinds of things. We're in these golfing shots right here. Always, you know, unless you have a telephoto lens to kind of zoom in on the golfer back there, these are pretty standard shots. Now, okay, now we have a little bit different landscape here with the water, and then we have the that pavilion that's up there. Okay, we'll just run through these real quick just to kind of get an idea. We'll come back to the more of my favorite ones here. Okay, maybe this is where you're setting some exposure compensation here. You got a bunch of them that look like they've maybe you were adjusting the exposure compensation. Okay, all right, so let's go back to these. Okay, in terms of shooting something like this, maybe cropping off a little bit more off the on the foreground here, because it looks like what you really want to focus on is right back here. Okay, now this is a very symmetrical shot, but works really well. And I can't tell if you were using your exposure compensation on this, but certainly your exposure could be a little bit more so that it's a little darker, because they're all pretty consistently light right there. I really like how you framed these horses through the trees right there. Very nice, very nicely done. And you could probably crop a little off the left-hand side here, but you know, this little area right in here, really wonderful. Very well done. I like the other one better. This one, you can just get rid of this foreground part right here. The same, well, with this, maybe just cropping a little off the sky here, and maybe coming in a little bit closer. I love these grasses here, and using this as an element somehow to frame up the that pavilion. So good job. Love the fact that you got all over the park, and that you were shooting a wide variety of pictures. And when you're working with these things, make sure that you're maybe taking a look at your composition, you know, when you're shooting a landscape. You know, some of the golfing kinds of shots, more like snapshots. You know, you maybe want to approach this where it's something where, you know, as you're looking at this, that you can definitely think about your composition and how it would make a little bit more dynamic picture. But your exposures look good, but make sure that you're not shooting at such a high ISO if you're outside like that on a bright sunny day. So otherwise, James, everything looks good. Thanks very much.